everyone. This is a special meeting of Livingston's Planning Board, and notice of this meeting has been distributed in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act. Mr. Klein? Here. Mr. Ratner? Here. Mr. Reaper? Here. Mr. Lewis? Here. Ms. Cucci? Here. Ms. Bagoli? Here. Ms. Vishnu? Here. Mrs. Santola? Here. Mr. Fernandez? Here. We have our quorum, we have our board attorney, and for this matter, we do have our assistant township engineer. Mr. Diner is not present. We have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Please call the first matter. He's new? Yeah. Oh, wow. Wow. I've been asking for new microphones for 15 years.
As soon as Rosie came on board, they got it all straightened out.
Everything gets done.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to call the first matter is a continued hearing for preliminary and final site plan with variances for 212-214-222 North Livingston Avenue, Block 1706, lots 1, 2, and 55. Application number 2013-22-PFSPV, Divya Realty LLC. Attorney Michael Lapari is present for that matter.
Thank you very much. This
Also,
is-
Attorney Peter Davidson is also here, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Just as a reminder, we've had 3 hearings on this application. The final one, I believe, was in February when the record had been closed. And we had given non-binding guidance for our attorney to prepare a resolution. And we received a letter that you've asked us to reopen the record. So I will then turn it over to both of you.
Thank you and good evening. Michael Lapari with the law firm of Mandelbaum Barrett. Michael Lapari with the law firm of Mandelbaum Barrett. I'm counsel to the tenant of the property. It's Sousa Restaurant Group, doing business as Asado Steakhouse. And I'll let Mr.
Yes. Good evening. I was here at the last hearing, Mr. Fernandez. I put on the presentation, put on the proofs. We received the proposed resolution. I had a couple of responses to that I thought that the board should consider. And after a discussion with, in the interim, Mr. Lapari made a notice of appearance in this matter and wanted to discuss the aspects that I wrote in my letter. And one of them are very important. I indicated to Mr. Valerio and the board and certain members why the seating issue was very important to this to the site, to the landlord and the tenant, and that is why I wrote the letter asking to reopen the matter regarding the seating allocation, because I feel very strongly that there were some things that may not have been considered and overlooked. And that's what Mr. Lapari also wants to address that directly.
Yes, thank you. And we're in a little bit of a unique situation. Obviously, the tenant, Mr. Wilson D'Souza, had testified earlier regarding the application. Once we got a copy of the draft resolution, we just wanted to make some clarifications, if possible, and bring some issues to the board prior to any vote, so that maybe there could be some tweaks to the resolution that wouldn't create maybe some unintended consequences to my client, most notably the allocation of parking and patrons. So I guess the real big issue with the resolution as drafted is that we currently have an approval for, as I understand it, 60 patrons inside, 60 patrons outside, for a total of 120 at any given time. The fire code allows for, I believe, 79 patrons to be inside. All we're really asking on that, in that regard, is that the resolution cap us at 120. which can be allocated anyway, but never to exceed the fire code limitations of 79 patrons inside at any point in time. That way, we will never exceed the 120 as permitted, and we will never exceed the 79 permitted inside at any point in time.
Well, there was testimony that was considered by the board that there were the plan may have been to have 79 seats inside and 60 seats outside at all times. So let me just, so prior to, what you're really asking the board to do is to reopen the hearing on seating and in what other aspects?
Well, they're all related, but seating is the biggest issue. As it relates to the seating, obviously, if we have to start relocating some of the outdoor furniture, we would like to have an opportunity to just briefly address that and why it's necessary for us to have sometimes extra chairs and tables outside, which is sort of related to the limitation. Obviously, if the limitation wasn't restricted, it wouldn't make much of a difference because they only have so much furniture, but I'd like to address that. And just a brief point on the exterior parking, the off-site parking on the street.
Okay, so really you're asking the board to reopen the hearing on seating, off-site parking, and furniture location.
Respectfully,
Right, okay.
That's what was contained in the letter.
Okay.
And those issues are very distinct, but they have, the overall application that was made had other issues in it that were resolved, other issues that were granted. This is basically the issue dealing with the tenant and the restaurant.
So what are the thoughts of the board on reopening the hearing? And Jackie, if the board were so inclined, when would this be heard?
Mr. Chairman, we could accommodate that at a meeting on June 6th.
Okay, so thoughts from the board?
Well, there was throughout all three hearings a lot of confusion as to exactly what was being requested, not requested. The operator, I believe, actually testified, but it's not clear. At the end of the day, I want to get it right. I want to do, what's, I think, fair and right to the business, but equally important, what protects the neighborhood. And I think that's best done by having as complete a record as we do. So I think reopening it, I wouldn't have an objection. They'd have to comply with any notice requirements and that, but I don't object to it.
I would not object to reopening if there has to be some additional testimony offered in order to enable us to determine whether or not the draft is correct or whether or not some changes would be necessary to the draft, so that we can be certain that we are arriving at the correct conclusion, which, as was said by Mr. Lewis, would be favorable both to the applicants and to the public and the general interest of the town.
I have to say, what confuses me is I thought we granted the application. It's rare that a victorious applicant doesn't want the application that it filed. So, but the reality of it, I think, is they could file a new application. So we're going to have to hear it regardless. So we may as well make it the most sensible and easy way to get it back. Obviously, you have to renotice the neighborhood for the 6th, but I don't have any objection to hearing it.
Any other thoughts? Jackie, do you want to take a vote?
Well, we need a motion.
Yeah, can we have a
and
motion to
second.
reopen in a second, please?
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
Ms. Wishnu will participate in this vote in place of Mr. Diner. Okay, Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Klein?
Yes.
Mr. Ratner? Yes. Mr. Reaper? Yes. Ms. Cucci? Yes. Ms. Begoli?
Yes.
Ms. Wishnu? Yes. Mr. Santola?
Yes.
Mr. Fernandez?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries. So the new date is going to be Tuesday, June 6th at 7:30 p.m.
And you will notice all the residents?
Yep, Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Comply with the-
And I would just, Mr. Lipari, since you're kind of new to the game, I don't know if you had the opportunity, I'd certainly encourage you to read the transcripts, and you'll see, I think where the concerns arose was, how do we, if we allow 79 chairs permanently inside and 60 outside, then the potential's there for 139 people to sit there instead of 120. And the challenge from the town's perspective, enforcing that short of going inside, doing a head count every night that the business is open. And that's, I would encourage you, in connection with any relief you're seeking, to make sure that you're keeping in mind, how would we be able to know that at any given time there's not more than 120 people?
No, I certainly appreciate that. I know that's always the challenge, and I'll make sure
Thank
that we're able to address that.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate the consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And it's-
The next matter scheduled for this evening is a continued matter. Preliminary and final site plan with variances continued from April 4, 2023 for 389-405 East Mount Pleasant Avenue, Block 2100, lots 22 through 25, 35.01, 35.02, 35.03, application number 2022-65-PFSPV, Mount Pleasant Partners LLC. Mr. Chairman, I'll note for the record that member Reber has left the meeting. He's recused from this application. And I'll recognize the town planner and traffic consultant.
Thank you. Welcome back, although this is my first time.
Thank you. Yes,
seeing
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome back.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
And I did read the transcript and watched it as well, so I am fully familiar with it. I'm sorry that I will not be able to run the meeting as well as Steve, but will certainly do my best.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, for the record, again, good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Peter Flannery with the law firm of Bisgayer Hoff on behalf of the applicant, Mount Pleasant Partners LLC. This is a continued hearing from April 4th. As the board will recall, Mr. Lawrence Appel, our architect, was testifying at the last hearing. He's going to complete his testimony this evening. He should be relatively brief. I think he had almost finished his testimony at the last hearing. Then we'll bring up Mr. Gary Dean, our traffic engineer, and then we'll have Mr. Michael Lanzafama, our civil engineer, return to discuss some of the parking and loading issues that the board had raised at the last hearing. So Mr. Appel was previously sworn and qualified, and Mr. Appel, just recognize that you remain under oath.
Yes.
And if you could just continue your presentation from the board.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Green light? All right, thank you. So I had gone through the architectural elevations and talked about the building facades. I wanted to make sure that, I think I talked about the signage, but wanted to make sure. On drawing number PB-1.2, there's entry signage. This was a question that we had raised, and I thought that at the track meeting, they had determined that the signage with the lettering as indicated on the architectural drawings, sitting above the horizontal canopies in here would not trigger a relief. But I know that that was still a question in here. We are showing the lettering above. We have shown the lettering sizes, and we believe that aesthetically this is preferred, as well as we think that it will read a little bit easier based on the way it's silhouetted, so that the signage would not have to be large and lit just to be visible like this. So.
Mr. Appel, this is from the plan set that was submitted
Correct.
as part of the
It's
application, so it's not a new exhibit?
Correct. This is PB-1.2. There were no changes since the prior submission.
Thank you. And as the board will recall, Mr. Lanzafama did speak on this issue and provided variance proofs for the canopy signage to the extent that the board requires a variance for same. It is the applicant's position that no variance is required, but ultimately it's up to the board.
So I think where I left off, I was talking a little bit about the clubhouse. This is a unique opportunity here. The clubhouse is attached to building number 3. So this is both, has an entry to the building, number 3, which is a lobby entrance, as well as the entry to the clubhouse. This entry provided an opportunity for a pedestrian plaza and also an opportunity to locate 2 flagpoles at this area, as well as integrate it with the hardscape and landscape. The area of the clubhouse will have a flat roof. It shares many of the same design aesthetics and materials, but it has a flat roof rather than a pitch roof. Inside the program of the clubhouse includes a leasing office, model apartment, central club room, outdoor space, gym and fitness area. Also have a business center for use by residents. A golf simulator is also planned, and these are all common program tenant amenities for a luxury community like this. So I wanted to skip, we had shown on the prior, we had shown architectural elevations along Mount Pleasant Avenue. We included both views showing the full landscaping as well as making the landscaping transparent so that you can see a little bit of the building when we were describing all of the materials. And I wanted to then move to Force Hill. What we had done is we had prepared 2 renderings to show mature landscaping in these areas and to show the effectiveness. There was already landscape testimony, but we thought a colored picture would kind of show more of what this looks like and how effective the landscaping really is. So particular attention was paid to the landscaping. The buildings were oriented and rotated to reduce their impact, as well as there's a deep recess at this center area where my cursor is, where there's a courtyard beyond. Views 3A and 4A show views with mature landscaping, as I indicated. And I'm going to shift this. This is more as if you're looking from across the street. And then we oriented a second view to show more of the view as a car on the roadway. And this, again, is showing mature landscaping from Force Hill Road.
Are these new exhibits?
And I believe these are all submitted,
These are
entered
all,
into the
these are
record at the last
already,
hearing.
already submitted. These, none of these are new. I think they've already been distributed. If there's any reason, we have some smaller handouts. If any of the board members want to see that close up, that's fine as well.
Right. I think we started with A9 and then went to A7 and A8, and I think it was A10, and this is A11, I believe.
Since you have identified these as mature trees, can you give everybody an idea of how long it takes to get to size?
I think, and I believe Mr. Conway was indicating that these are in about the 10 to 12-year range
Thank you.
as we're depicting them.
Right.
So one of the other issues, the ordinance includes a number of green building features. We are proposing to address all of this during when we put together the construction documents. So these are really not necessarily issues that get discussed, at planning board, but there are a number of metrics. We're anticipating handling all of these. One of the issues is that the architectural drawings do show EV charging stations. In addition, on the architectural elevations, we have dotted in proposed locations on the pitch roofs to incorporate solar. This is not engineered. We showed them diagrammatically. It needs to be engineered, and this is all going to be evaluated when we go into construction documents to determine the exact configuration but we are proposing to have solar on the building. There were also another number of fire comments that were received and discussed at the track meeting. We pretty much agree with all of the items that were raised. For instance, standpipes will be located at all of the main egress stairs, the fire department connection. We will coordinate that with the authorities having jurisdiction to make sure we locate these where it's appropriate, both code-wise as well as for the authorities having jurisdiction. Attic access will only be for maintenance only, not for storage unless specifically designed and with appropriate fire sprinklers. The buildings are fully sprinklered in accordance with code. And in addition, that following construction, the structures will be tested with the first responders to make sure that their radios are fully operational inside the structure, and if they need amplification or repeaters, those will be added as well. In addition, Knox box locations will be coordinated as well, so we will work with the authorities having jurisdiction to locate these. And I think one of the other issues that I wanted to, for locations for access to first responders to the garage level, we have addressed some of these based on comments at the track meeting, but we will work with the town to confirm that we have adequate access in case there's an emergency or fighting a fire within the garage. I think those were all the elements and items that I had for discussion this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Appel.
I do have a couple of questions.
Certainly.
Going back to the canopy signs,
Yes.
you've indicated that they're 18 square feet, but since we are going to have to give a variance, since the ordinance only permits wall signs, you ought to give us some specific dimensions.
So we had drawn a box in here at 9 foot wide by 2 foot high, but the lettering that's shown is a little bit smaller than this. We had just shown that because we don't have the exact configuration. We don't know if there's going to be a building number required by the town also. So we wanted to have a little bit of wiggle room. Is the 18 square feet feel inappropriate or too large for this? I was
18 square feet could be 9 by 2.
yes.
So,
Yes, 9 by 2, and that was,
That's right.
Mr. Alonso Fama had mentioned those dimensions when he
if
provided the
that's what
planning.
we're going to
purpose.
lock into,
Right.
then we ought to say, if we grant the variance, that it not exceed 9 by 2.
100%. I think that's very reasonable.
Nothing else from me at the moment.
The building that faces Mount Pleasant Avenue, how many stories is that?
Three stories as it faces Mount Pleasant Avenue.
So can you go to the very first page you had up? That was like the placeholder for,
You're talking about,
it was a rendered image, 3D. No, that one.
yes.
So what is that a shot of?
So this is building number 3 with the clubhouse adjacent to this. So basically, the clubhouse is a 1-story structure, a little taller, and then the building to the left is the piece of building number 3, which is a 3-story structure, actually 3 stories with a pitch roof.
That view would be from inside the site? Looking at that, you'd be on the site, the view
Yes.
you're showing, right?
Yes.
That's not from any street.
So is that a porte cochere, or are those doors in where the columns are in the front?
So the front in here is an entrance into the clubhouse, and to the left is actually an entrance, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more, is the entrance to building number 3. So the building number 3, it shares the clubhouse. You walk in there, there's a lobby,
I got it.
package room, and then it tucks you right into building number 3. We felt that it was kind of a unique opportunity to connect them.
So the building facing Mount Pleasant's 3 stories.
Correct.
The middle big building is,
They're basically, all the buildings are set up because of the topography.
Right.
You have a high side and a low side, so you have 3 stories exposed, and then the parking exposes itself on the low side.
got it.
And that's typical on all of the buildings.
Anything else, Steve?
Nope, thanks.
Any other questions from the board? Any questions from the public for this witness as to his testimony? Seeing none. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Next, I'd like to bring forward,
I
Oh, sorry.
looked in the, do you have questions for this witness as to his testimony?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
So, my name is Venkata Kothapalli. I live in 16 Venkata, V-E-N-K-A-T-A. Okay, V-E-N-K-A-T as in Tom, A. First name, last name, K-O-T-H-A, T as in Tom, H-A-P as in Peter, A-L-L-I.
Rocco, could you lift the microphone up for a little, help him out? On the stand. We got all this fancy equipment, we got it.
Susan?
We can't do it remotely, up and down.
He's a traffic engineer, he's not a mechanical engineer.
Before you start, could we get your address again?
Your address, please?
So 16 Forest Hill Road.
Forest Hill.
Forest Hill. 16
Forest Hill.
16 Forest Hill Road.
Forest Hill Road.
So, yeah, this property will be right behind our homes, 3 homes. So, main concern we have
Yeah,
is
but-
about,
So, right now, just to ask questions of the witness. At the end, you will have an opportunity to make any statement that you'd like. So right now, what we're doing is just, if you have any questions for the witness, now is the time for that. If you want to make just a general statement, you'll have a chance to do that at the end.
okay, I think maybe it's general statement, I guess. I don't know if it's a question. I mean, I already spoke to the developer already once. It's about privacy. So, is the fence and trees good enough to cover the privacy or not? So I don't know if it's a question to the witness or
Who
to you.
testified as the fence?
Mr. Lanza-Fama will address that. He had mentioned, he discussed that briefly at the last hearing, so.
All right, so
Certainly answer it.
fencing will come up a little bit later.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So not now, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Okay,
correct.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think we're good.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Do you need drawings up? So which,
The next witness will be Gary Dean, our traffic engineer. I'm going to have him sworn and qualified
tell me which one
as soon as we
opened?
have his exhibit up.
No, not that group. That's the revised plans.
Okay.
Go to the left, go up, five there.
Yep.
Open up that one.
Perfect, thank you. Get me to what I need. Thank you, Larry.
You're gonna have a harder time finding that
I
one.
don't want to touch it.
Have Mr. Dean sworn in, please.
Yes, I do. My name is Gary Dean, D-E-A-N. Professional address is 181 West High Street in Somerville, New Jersey.
Thank you. Mr. Dean, just briefly for the board, if you could describe your education, experience, and licensure.
Certainly. I'm a graduate of Lehigh University with a Bachelor of Science degree in Civil Engineering. I've been actively engaged in the practice of traffic engineering and related matters since 1983. And I have a professional engineering license from the state of New Jersey, which is current and remains in good standing. I've also appeared before this board probably within the past 18 months, if I'm not mistaken, on behalf of a Starbucks application and a child care center on South Livingston Avenue.
Any questions or comments from the board? Thank you. We'll accept those.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dean, I believe we have an exhibit. I don't recall this was entered into the record. It's a colorized version of sheet. Okay, this is Exhibit A1, I believe. Go ahead, Mr. Dean.
Yes. A1 depicts, or the exhibit on the screen depicts the property in question. I believe Mr. Lanzenfam identified it, but north is to the right-hand side of the page, and Mount Pleasant Avenue, or Route 10, which will be the focus of some of my presentation, is to the left. The subject application represents the consolidation of a number of individual properties with 3 driveways to Mount Pleasant Avenue. The subject application seeks to consolidate the properties, to develop the property as has been discussed, and leaving only a single point of ingress and egress in a boulevard configuration that will lead to the state highway. Our office was first retained by the applicant about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, worked with Mr. Lanzafama regarding the best place for the proposed access. Fortunately, Mount Pleasant Avenue runs in a very straight alignment. However, there is a bit of vertical relief, meaning there's a slight crest or a hill. The proposed driveway for the subject property is located at the high point of that elevation. So it takes best advantage of the visibility for motorists who will be entering and exiting, looking east and west. Because Mount Pleasant Avenue is a state highway, it is subject to the provisions and requirements of the New Jersey Department of Transportation. The DOT has an access management code that is akin to your zoning ordinance. Applicants for access must follow certain regulations in terms of the minimum and maximum widths of driveways, visibility, radii, and a variety of geometric factors. We have already applied to the Department of Transportation. It is a lengthy process. Even though we are consolidating access and, if you will, cleaning up a number of multiple driveways, nevertheless, the DOT takes about 6 months to a year, if we're lucky, to receive final approval. Our application was deemed complete and submitted to the project manager on April 5th of this year, and that initiates a 90-day review clock for DOT to weigh in on all of the design-related elements, including drainage, among other things. One important component that I know is discussed at the last hearing is the inclusion of a sidewalk that will be in the DOT right-of-way, and that is reflected on the plans as well. So we are hopeful that by the end of this year, we should have a DOT approval in hand. Related to this particular application, and with that background, my office prepared a traffic impact assessment for the subject application. It was dated November 2nd of 2022. The traffic study includes what I suspect the board has heard as the traditional elements of a study, wherein we send field personnel to the site. We conduct traffic counts, and we did that at the nearest intersection to the site, which is Force Hill Road, immediately to our west. Those traffic counts were done on June 7th of 2022, so 10 months ago. Local schools were in session. We had certainly emerged from COVID, and in our opinion and in our study of similar sites, I believe we collected our data that is representative of typical conditions we would find in the area. And just to share a few numbers, I know they sometimes get tedious, but I wouldn't characterize Mount Pleasant as being particularly busy, and I contrast that with roads like Route 124 and 24. It carries about 600 vehicles in the morning peak hour, which was from 8 to 9 a.m., And we determine that through, as I indicated, sending our field personnel to the site, basically counting every car that goes by, or in this instance, turn to and from Forest Hill Road. In the evening, the traffic is a little higher. It's just above 750 vehicles per hour. But where I'm accustomed to seeing, say, state highways carrying 2,000 vehicles per hour, or even 1,800, 600 to 700, I would not characterize as particularly busy, although it is well-traveled. Traffic engineers evaluate operations using a term called level of service, and it's how we measure the performance of a road or intersection. And from our counts and looking at the conditions, we measured the nearest intersection, which is Forest Hill, and we found that that presently operates at a level of service B. And this level of service term is, it helps gauge performance, and it's akin to a report card, with A being a very favorable level of service, where we as drivers essentially pull up, we look left, we look right, we don't see traffic, and we go. As we get to the bottom end of the scale as drivers at level of service F, that's a condition where, candidly, it seems like an eternity, but we're waiting upwards of a minute, 50 seconds, a minute, and beyond. Forest Hill Road and Mount Pleasant Avenue, given the conditions, God bless you, is operating at a level of service B during both the morning and evening peak hours. So fairly, I would say very favorable conditions for suburban northern New Jersey for rush hour. The next step in our study is to forecast an estimate of how much traffic the subject development would generate. As you've heard described, there are 254 units, of which 152 would be senior market units, and by senior, they are age restricted. We would not have children within the community, which cuts down on a certain amount of traffic. There could be up to 51 non-age restricted units, and then 51 affordable age-restricted senior units. So of the total community, more than 203 are senior units. Now, how is that important to traffic conditions? Well, as individuals enter their golden years and have more leisure time and aren't adhering to the 9 to 5 commuting schedule, we find that given the choice, why would anyone go out at rush hour if they didn't have to? And for that reason, and it's compiled within data that has been from studies conducted at these types of communities, it's a fairly low traffic generator by comparison to non-age restricted housing. And in our report, we provided an estimate of the 3 different housing types between senior, the non-age restricted or the market units, and then the affordable senior units. And we would expect in the morning rush hour, if you will, some people may leave, some people may shop or even go to work still. We would have about 60 total trips in 1 hour, so a car a minute. That's comprised of 20 motorists who would enter, maybe picked up a paper, a loaf of bread, what have you, ran an errand, and came back home in the morning peak hour. But the majority would be exiting, so up to 40 vehicles leaving in that hour. At nighttime, we have the reverse. We have maybe 40 people arriving back into the community, recognizing that we do have some non-age restricted units, and about 30 people leaving, so that trip count goes up to 70. Again, for 254 units, not particularly problematic, and I contrast that with traditional single-family homes that generate about a car per unit at night. So if you contrast the potential, if you will, had this been developed for 254 single-family homes, we're, a third to a quarter, somewhere in that range, and that's attributed to the nature of the product type. Traffic engineers then assume a certain layering. We take into consideration that traffic increases typically over time arising from development. The pandemic changed that a little bit. in that e-commerce became very popular, so people don't go to the stores quite as much. Delivery services became very popular, not only for food, but obviously the parcels that people aren't buying at the store, but also telecommuting, where people can now work remotely. Employers are beginning to shed certain office environments and allow people, given the technology, to work from home. So the combination of those elements, plus a change in overall demographics. We're nearing the end of the baby boomer generation. More and more people retired during COVID. And as a result, we've seen traffic a little bit lower than it was, say even 5 years ago. And I want to give some reference to Mr. Klein, Lee Klein, your consultant's evaluation of our findings. I've opined as to the reason traffic's a little bit lower. I know traffic engineers in general, myself included, tend to err on the side of caution and be overly conservative. And what Mr. Klein did in his review, if I'm not mistaken, looked at 10-year-old traffic data in comparison to the counts that we did, and found, and I'll maybe cut to the punchline, found that everything will still work fine, whether I use 2022 data or even look at 10-year-old traffic data, which was much higher. So the good news is the system works. I think the reason I didn't use that data is because I've come in before, not this board, but other boards with traffic counts that are 2 years old, and the first reaction is, oh my goodness, Mr. Dean, that's stale data. We need fresh counts. So we always collect recent counts instead of looking back in time. We try to look forward. But I'm pleased to say, and I thank Lee for his efforts to review that, hopefully to your satisfaction, is that the driveway will work. We will have acceptable, favorable levels of service, also at level of service B during the peak hours. And so whether we're using, like I said, higher inflated older counts or contemporary data, I hope this board has a level of comfort that what has been designed and proposed will operate safely and efficiently, that we meet all of the recognized design standards for the design of the access and how it can accommodate vehicular traffic. You've also heard from Mr. Lanzafama that we have designed, and maybe it's easier to, I'm hopefully, does it show up? Yeah, I'm showing on the screen with the cursor a boulevard design. That boulevard design is, I'll say, required under the residential site improvement standards once a community gets above a certain size, for a very simple reason: emergency vehicle access. In the event, whether it's a fire or any other need to access the site, that type of apparatus can drive on either side of the boulevard in order to get to the subject property. As an added measure of safety, you've heard the presentation that and it's highlighted, but that an emergency-only access through a grass paver system, which is designed to accommodate fully loaded, even tractor trailers, but certainly fire apparatus, another means via Force Hill Road to enter the facility. I've reviewed all of the internal geometry, the parking sufficiency, and in my opinion, it meets the appropriate residential site improvement standards for overall site circulation. Getting into the site a little bit more, you've heard described the means of access to the under-building parking areas and also the concept of tandem parking. Mr. Lanzafama is exactly correct. It's like a townhouse or even a single-family home that's front-loaded where someone parks in the driveway and there's a car in front of it, and it's, honey, who's leaving first in the morning, and the individual unit owners or homeowners make the car switch. But it is a very commonly used requirement. I think technically this board will need to grant the de minimis exception relief in that each parking stall is supposed to have, in addition to being 9 by 18, is supposed to have an access aisle of 24 feet behind it. The stalls do, as we zoom in, and they do have the appropriate access aisle, but there are a few select areas where we have the tandem parking, and I don't know how to, I think we do it this way. Yep. Oh, this is touch? Yes. Oh, fabulous, thank you. So, for example, in Building 3, where I've highlighted, you'll see along the northerly side where we have the tandem parking, and again, it's just up to the individual unit owner. Most often in this product type, given the age of residents, oftentimes they only have one vehicle, so it does obviate that need, but for those that do have two, it's usually a second car that is infrequently used. So that tends to work itself out in that those tandem spots need to be assigned to one specific unit owner. Beyond that, I think you'll hear from Mr. Lanzafama, but some effort was made into taking the board's concerns into consideration to address some of the loading areas, and I don't want to get ahead of that testimony, but I will say I've reviewed it from a traffic engineering perspective. I think the amendments that you'll see in a few minutes will provide greater efficiency for parking and loading and refuse and some of the business side of operating the building, but I do think it was in response to the concerns that you expressed at the last hearing. Otherwise, I'm concluded with my direct and happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Dean. And just, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, just to clarify for the record, Mr. Lanzafama will be discussing on-site circulation, parking, and loading in more detail. So the board may want to reserve those questions for Mr. Lanzafama, but please proceed.
Thank you. Any questions from our professionals? Anything? Great, thank you. Any questions from the board?
I had a couple. So Lee, I read with interest your calcs from 2013 and the difference. So basically, that wasn't from a necessarily an applicant's testimony. That was from what DOT was putting out from 2013.
DOT website, correct.
Right. And have you done that on similar applications that you've been representing boards on?
During COVID, I'll look up traffic numbers if I can find them nearby, and I'll look at them just to see how things were, if I can get a 2018 count or a 2019 count, and show that it's significantly different. I might make them do another analysis, but in this case, it was, I think, within 10%, the numbers that I found, slightly higher. Or, yeah.
Right. So do you think that, based on the factors Mr. Dean mentioned, that there might actually be decreased traffic on a continuous basis, or you think we're slowly heading back towards?
I mean, I can't remember ever seeing a negative growth factor in a DOT growth factor table. I mean, you might get 0.25%, depending on where you are, but you never see a negative growth or, reduction in traffic. But from what Mr. Dean is saying, and I'm hearing that a lot, that there are other trips that are happening, not necessarily people going to work every day. They might go 2, 3, 4 times a week. So there's a reduction, I think, in traffic in certain instances.
In the peaks, anyway.
During the peaks, correct, yeah.
Right.
Flexibility of being able to go at different times.
It'd be interesting to watch over the years
Yeah,
and see how
it will
that
be.
goes.
And we did include a growth factor. In other words, our traffic study, even though 2022 is our baseline counts, we assumed that there would be continuing redevelopment in any given community, and that, as historically has been the case, traffic continues to grow. I don't know when and where it'll plateau. Certainly COVID flattened it out a bit, and we didn't have, I've been doing this long enough. It's not like the 80s where things were, through the roof annually. It's cresting or not growing at the same rate it traditionally has. But our study did assume, yes, a modest, continuous, annual background increase in traffic, arising from redevelopments and other changes such as this.
So on the tandem, which we talked, I
Yes.
think the concern was at the last meeting. So I lived in a house years ago that had a single driveway, 2 cars, and if my wife was home before me and I had to leave in the morning, I parked the car in the street, threw the keys inside, and off I went. I didn't come down 4 flights on an elevator, and if we needed to switch at night, we would run outside, it was right outside the door, instead of both of us getting on an elevator, going down. So here's the concern. I know I'm leaving first in the morning, I get home first, I'm not pulling all the way in. I'm gonna park in that second space, and then my roommate or my wife is gonna park in one of the guest spots out in the parking lot. And with that many, if you had 24 or 20 tandem spaces, you could account for that, right? And it wouldn't be that big a deal. But with this many, in your professional opinion, is there a concern here that we're gonna run out of spots if a whole bunch of people just don't pull up because they don't wanna deal with it?
No, but very fair question. If this were non-age restricted, and the scenario you described is, you were working, you know, spouse, roommate working, yes. And that's not to say everyone who lives in the community won't be working, but as a matter of lifestyle, you know, I can remember the day I realized I qualified for age-restricted housing, and I'm still not there yet. I mean, so it's the demographics of the residents tend to skew a little bit higher, and it's not, you know, suddenly there's an onslaught of 55 and year-olds wanting to move in. So I think that's why I contrast why this is appropriate and can work in this particular environment. Obviously, and I haven't consulted with the applicant, but from a leasing perspective, unless they're two-bedroom units, the 51 non-age restricted units, we'll have to look closely at that to make sure they get individual spots to lessen that merry-go-round or carousel with vehicles. But I think that's a fair point. I just have to distinguish it given the product type.
I live in an apartment complex similar to this. I can't imagine how the tandem can work. It's, regardless of age, just jockeying in there. I'm struggling with that myself, just because I live in one of these type of units with the underground parking and various, levels. Coming in and out of there, it's just not very wide to turn around and to get maneuver your cars. And most of these people will be, I agree with you, in the guest spot. And that's where I was wondering where that was. We talked about it last time you were here, but I'm sorry, that tandem is just not working for me, I have to be honest with you. I'm sure Mr. Lonzafama can talk about it a little more.
I think, again, one other difference is consideration of who moves in here. And obviously, it's left to the marketplace. And if that's a concern that you might have as a prospective tenant of, I really can't say tolerate the inconvenience or however your perception is, this isn't the place for you to rent. I mean, and I think what happens is, as we do age, and let's say somebody has a really nice convertible that they only take out on sunny days, and they never drive it in the winter, that's what goes in the back. And it sits there all winter. And there's a car that's used for a daily driver, while the classic or the sports car or whatever it is stays in back, and with a cover on it sometimes. So I think that might be more of the scenario where, whether it's an individual widower, or an older couple, maintaining two cars for day-to-day use does become a challenge, but that you leave it up to the individual unit owner to park in the back. And if it's a matter of management, making sure that the visitor spaces are remaining open, things like decals and leasing and registering with the office, they'll know very quickly who the offenders are. So it is to their benefit to ensure that it works right.
So that's always the push-pull for us, right? Like, nobody wants to get involved with the applicant's business. It's a market risk. But it's also our job to make sure stuff doesn't get built that doesn't work, right? Because then nobody looks good. So what you just made a couple of suggestions that I think, have you seen before, where you have a resident decal, and if you have a resident decal or a resident number, then you got to park in that spot, and you and your wife or roommate got to work it out, so that we don't end up with people parking out on Forest Hill Road, or, because the guest spots are all full.
And that's part of the other, the guest spots I know are precious, and we've done, and I'll have to defer to Mr. Lonzafama, half space per unit? So we follow the RSIS standard where 2 units get 1 visitor spot. Is there ever an occasion where there's that many visitors? And I can think of, and it's more akin to assisted living where Mother's Day and Father's Day and things of that nature where you do have a lot of visitors. If this is active adult, that's a little different than a nursing home or, individuals can drive and have the freedom as independent living. So I've always struggled with that RSIS set aside of a half a space per unit. I think you wind up with a lot of empty spots is usually what happens. But we follow the regulations for that parking supply. That's an awful lot of relatives and boyfriends and girlfriends and, other individuals showing up to visit on any one day. That's a pretty high set aside for that.
Perhaps it's Michael's question, but the tandem space is, 36 feet?
Yes.
There are a bunch of SUVs out there that are more than half that now. So is it going to be parked by noise?
Sure. I can say, because it's not the first time I've heard that question, I've looked at the vehicle dimensions of last time I looked it up, it was 110 different models. The Suburban is the longest at, I believe it's 18 feet, 3 inches.
Well, it's
And-
211 inches, okay.
So-
But there are
so-
a bunch of conventional, not the Suburban or the
Understood.
Escalade type, that run more than half that.
Well,
within inches.
And that would mean if literally 2 Suburbans parked using a tandem spot, they'd be exceeding the dimension of the stall by 1 foot. The probability of that happening is, I'd have to say, fairly remote. 2 big, giant, enormous 3-row SUVs owned by individuals who live in age-restricted housing is, it's a stretch, but the average, say, an Explorer is 16 feet, a Camry's 15 and a half, a Lexus ES30 is, I think it's right around 16. So that's what fits comfortably.
Sam only understands Corvettes.
You park in the back
I
then.
need 2 feet on each side.
You want your spaces side
That's
by
if he
side.
remembers to hit the brake when he pulls in. The tandem is a permitted scenario, as I understand it. So I'm not 100% sure if it's a variant situation or not. But I think I would encourage a condition that the board express concern about the number of tandem spaces and would expect the management of the property to keep detailed, records of the use and to assure that residents were properly using the reserved spaces. You can't blame us, right? We've never seen an application with this many tandem spots, and it's got everybody's hackles up.
I think it's a very creative way, in my opinion, to
Permit more density.
no,
Yes.
I was going to say,
Agreed.
put in less blacktop. I mean, I'm a rare traffic guy that doesn't like wider roads. I don't like over paving, and I think it's a very good way. Look, the alternative I've also seen are stackers. That's, I think, even more of a compromise where you have a lift where one car fits under the other. This, I think, is a very practical way, and again, I say this in consideration of the specific use. I don't think a K. Hovnanian or Pulte product where they're doing townhouses open to the market with no age restriction, I don't think this would work at all. I do liken it to, and I did work for and lived in the hills in Somerset County, where townhouse with a garage, with a driveway, and my roommate and I, because we lived there, who's leaving first in the morning, and whoever got home, that's the way we worked it out. So could there be spillover into maybe an occasional visitor spot? I can't say it'll never happen, but not to the extent where it's replacing all of the tandem parking. I just think it's a better design alternative instead of putting more blacktop out on the property.
And the applicant would agree to a, reasonable condition, per, Mr. Santello had mentioned, in terms of, monitoring and enforcement and vehicle identification, correct?
Okay, that's
Is there
fair.
another building such as this one, maybe in the area that has this type of parking that you may be aware of? You may not know or have knowledge, just, I'm wondering if there's another one that may have this many types of tandem units.
You know, therein lies my problem, is that I do this 3 and 4 nights a week, and after a couple of years, I forget. I mean, I've looked at a lot of tandem parking, and I can tell you, there's some in Long Branch.
In these types of facility, in this
Yes, oh
level
yes,
of facility?
under building parking. Now, I don't want to say Jersey City, because there is some of that in much higher density buildings. In suburban, I believe Silverman did a building in 2 buildings in Morristown where they're smaller, 28 to 30 units, non-age restricted on Turtle Road that have tandem parking. And again, it's to satisfy RSIS, but not go vertical and not go wider, with serving the needs of the individual residents in a more economical and practical arrangement.
So
That's,
just those units with the,
But if you're gonna come to that.
yeah.
It's Mr. Appel.
Just almost every one of our multifamily projects right now have tandem spots. This does have a little bit more on a ratio, but being an active adult, I think that makes sense. The feedback that we're getting from developers is that it actually is working fairly well. So, but it is fairly common. We have projects in West Orange, South Orange. We have also in Livingston with tandem stalls. Clark, Cranford.
Okay.
So many locations, it's fairly common.
Any other questions from the?
Any other questions from the board? Seeing none, any questions from the public for this applicant as to this applicant's testimony? Seeing none, thank you very much.
thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Dean. Now, with the board's permission, I'd like to recall Mr. Michael Lanzafama, our civil engineering expert.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Lanzafama was previously sworn and qualified, and Mr. Lanzafama, you do remain under oath.
Yes, I acknowledge that. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm back this evening to talk about some of the studies we did after the last hearing. If you recall, the last time, there was some concern primarily regarding the areas between buildings 1 and 2, and the loading and unloading, the moving in, the moving out. So what we did is we went back, took a second look at it, and saw some opportunities not only to add some loading, but to also add some surface parking. So we submitted an exhibit, which I believe is... This was a study that we submitted. What we did is we did a blow-up of the area on the left side of what you see, and it's entitled Alternate Parking and Loading Exhibit, prepared under my direction from my office. And what we did is we first looked at the area between buildings 1 and 2, which is on the left-hand side of what you see. And what we did was, if you look in the cul-de-sac area that exists on the eastern end of the site, what we did is we doubled the loading on the south side. So we had a single 12 by 26 loading bay, and what we did is we made it 24 by 26. So you had the opportunity here to not only have the ability to have a move-in event, but also trash pickup at the same time. What we also did is we cut back the center island a bit to facilitate maneuvering by the vehicles in and out of that area. So if you look in the area, you see the two loading areas. You have a sidewalk area. We have the refuse area here. What we're also going to do is provide a separate entrance and hall into the garage area for moving in. So someone who is parked in this area in one of the loading stalls on the south side of the cul-de-sac can then bring furniture through the garage and down into the lobby area a short distance away, so they would be in an enclosed environment. They wouldn't be out in the elements coming down along the sidewalk. And this would bring them in the back end of the lobby and into the elevator areas. What we also did was add on the north side of the parking court, we added another loading area that would, just in case there was the need for a second move-in event at the same time, we could have a second loading area there that could work with either building 1 or 2. And what we further did was to address the concern of the deliveries, we reduced the size of the delivery area in front of building number 1's lobby. And we posted a sign that limits the parking to 15 minutes. So it's strictly for a UPS-type delivery, an Amazon-type delivery, perhaps an Uber pickup, whatever. But it's just for a short-term, very small vehicle can fit in that, not a very small vehicle, a smaller vehicle, not a truck, would fit in that area nicely, not obstruct traffic. And what it also allowed us to do was add an additional surface parking spot on both the east and west side of the lobby entrance. What we also did
Mike,
is,
just scroll down to the bottom. So that loading spot on the north side, how do you, what's the path to get, if I have a couch?
well, this is primarily for, number one, facilitates maneuvering of the vehicles, but also if there were a need for a vehicle to park in that area, a delivery vehicle of some sort, they would take it down the walkway and into the lobby, which is up on the upper level. But if you look at, on the right side, the building you see on the left side of the right portion of the exhibit is actually Building 2, which is the lower level section or the garage. And this is really the move-in spot you want to be in, because this is where move-ins would occur, because then you could take it, we're going to modify the walkways a bit and open up the area around the maintenance and equipment area and allow direct access into the area that is labeled lobby. This is an elevator. So we could have a move-in vehicle park here for Building 2. They would then, we'd have to modify this walkway a little bit, have them come into this lobby and into the elevator.
Is that the little parking lot next to the basin?
The tot lot, this is the tot lot? Is that what you're talking about, the tot lot here?
I'm trying to figure out where that loading space is. That's
Yeah.
for Building 2, the one on the right.
Let me do this for you. What I did is I took the exhibits I presented the last time and I marked them up in red.
Perfect.
That might be better for us to understand what I did. So. If it comes up, there we go.
This will be Exhibit A12.
Yeah, this is the same exhibit we had originally, but
I'm
what we
sorry?
did was we,
A12 would be PE.
The one he just had up.
Oh,
the one-
okay.
the one I had
All
up,
right,
so
so we'll
this
make this
would be-
A13.
We want to mark all of these as one exhibit, 13, of everything that you've marked here?
well, this was marked as an exhibit that we modified.
Right.
So I don't know if you want to mark it as like A2.1 or
Okay, why don't we
something.
do that?
8B.
So,
Okay. A2B.
and what this is the south area. This is the area we were just talking about. And what you can see from here, let's start on the south side of the cul-de-sac. And you can see we've added the additional loading space, access into the garage to provide for move-ins more directly. We added 2 parking stalls on the south side of the parking court, just east of the lobby, by reducing the size of the islands at each end. So we went from 9 to 11. On the far side, on the north side of that parking court, we eliminated the island and picked up 13 parking spaces there. And then we also had the ability to provide a third loading space in that courtyard of a 12 by 26 area.
I think where we lost you was the next loading spot.
Yeah, well, that's on the other, let me go to the other exhibit. Come on. There we go.
And this is a markup of another previously
Correct.
entered exhibit.
This is what was referred to as a rendering of the north site plan, the site plan north, which I think we had called A2, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So what we did here is we reduced the size of the tot lot, and opposite the exit driveway coming out of building number 2, we created a 12 by 26 loading area. So that would then allow us to move in directly into the lobby, come through the walkway and into the lobby area and into the elevator that would bring you up to the various floor levels. To do that, we would need to eliminate 2 of the parking spots here. But what we did is we reconfigured it so that we got back 3. So the 3 parking spaces we lost, we recouped in a perpendicular arrangement at the end of the parking row. So we had no net loss of parking. Why this is not loading up?
Just so I'm clear, oh, that's the pool. Okay.
Yeah, so it's taking a while to load up for some, oh, that's the end of it. So you can see where the building, this is building 2 on the left, you can see the clubhouse, and building 3 to the right.
So if you use that loading spot, which I guess you're saying is the main building 2 loading spot now,
Correct.
where you come in,
You come in right at this lobby area here,
right?
and there's an elevator right here.
Okay, good, I see.
So it's a very short distance. And also, what that allows us to do is use that same loading area for refuse. So we originally had the refuse up in this corner. We could move it down to the maintenance room that we have down at the lower end or the east side of the building, and that would facilitate the loading for the refuse as well as the move-ins and the move-outs. So I know that was a big concern of some of the board members was, well, how does the vehicle get down there? How do you pick up the garbage? Well, I think that answers that question. And having the loading area directly opposite the exit to the garage allows for the vehicle to make the necessary maneuvers to get in and out of that parking area or that loading area. So that's how we achieved that. And then finally, what we did to pick up an additional parking, we reduced the size of the island that exists here, and we were over-parked on our ADA parking. We had more handicap stalls than we needed, so we eliminated 1 handicap stall, which allowed us to pick up 2 more surface parking spaces in that area. So we went from 120 surface parking spots to 127. So that gives us that 1/2 of a car per dwelling unit as required, that it be in a totally accessible by the public in an area for parking. So that means that the garages can be totally secured and that their use can be regulated and monitored by the landlord. And as you heard earlier, we're willing to provide the appropriate measures to police that and to make sure that every tenant is parking in the space that they've been assigned to.
Do you view, in your professional opinion, the new loading parameters that you came up with as superior to the ones from last time?
Yes.
I don't have any.
the board? Any questions from our professionals? Any questions from the public?
I think that.
As to this testimony, yes.
Do you,
If you have a statement, you'll have a chance for a statement. If you have any questions regarding this witness's testimony, just come on up.
Well, I think he had a concern about the fence.
he had a concern about what I had testified
Right.
last hearing.
Okay, so let's do that.
Okay, come on up.
Right. Why don't you pull that exhibit out,
I'm,
Mr. Owens?
I'm trying to.
Sorry.
Let me go to the landscape plan, that might be better. No, that's the lighting. These are up, no. There we go. Okay, to answer this gentleman's question, he lives at, let me blow that up. He's tax lot 29? You're this, you're this house, correct? Yep. Okay. So you can see his concern is that the building is basically immediately behind his home. So what we had done is we took a look at how we might be able to soften that appearance for him. And if you recall, Mr. Conway had presented that we soldiered in a whole series of green giant arborvitae in that area, as well as what Brian likes to call a layering effect, where you have evergreens followed by shade trees that have large canopies, and then up on a higher level, more adjacent to the building, you have another row of shade trees followed by another row of evergreens. So that softens the appearance of the building from his backyard. The other concern that they had voiced at the last hearing was, suppose somebody is up in the third floor of the apartment, what do they see when they look down? And we did do a study on that. Let me see if I can find that. Is that on this one? I don't think that's on this one. Let me see if I can get that. So what we had done for the neighbors is we did another cross-section through the site. And this, on the left-hand side, is this gentleman's home. And we have all that information. We did their grading and drainage plans for them and as-built. So we had their survey information. We joined it with the survey information we have for the site. So we had both the horizontal and vertical relationship between the two properties. So what you see here is the landscaping that we're proposing is actually elevated compared to the location of his house. So you have the evergreen screen, and then you have the shade trees that further soften the appearance of the building. So if you're viewing from the second floor bedroom towards our building, you get a somewhat subdued view, a screened view. It's not going to be totally hidden, but its appearance would be softened. And then we took a second line and we projected it down from a person standing 6 feet high at the upper floor, looking down towards his building. And you could see that they would be able to see towards that building. So what we had indicated to them that we were willing to do for them is to add some green giant arborvitae on their property that would be located on that upper terrace that is in their backyard. And those green giant arborvitaes would be planted at approximately 8 foot high on the initial planting, and they would certainly grow to more than 16 or 18 feet in a relatively quick period of time. The distance from the top of that terrace to the the sight line is about 14 to 15 feet. So over time, we will be able to screen that out for them to make sure that nobody's looking in. But this is quite a distance away, as you could see.
Could those be planted on a berm without affecting the stormwater?
The trees here,
The ones that you're suggesting putting in?
well, this is on their property.
Yeah.
The property line is actually here. So their backyard rises up and pitches towards Forest Hill Road, which is on the left side of the exhibit. So the proposal would be to just plant them on the existing top of the terrace. I don't think it's necessary to berm it up in addition to that.
Where's their property line?
Our property line is right here.
So they're okay with the trees being in the middle of the backyard?
Yes,
Yeah,
they were fine with that.
Would this just be on this lot and block?
No,
There's 3 properties.
Yeah, let's identify those.
Let me go back to the landscaping plan. It would be tax lots 29, 30, and 31.
And all the property ownership are good with it?
Yes. Yes, I didn't mean to speak for you.
yeah.
Just to clarify, would there be a guarantee on the landscaping?
I couldn't hear.
Would there be a guarantee on the landscaping? Usually on-site landscaping?
There usually is a 2-year warranty on the plant materials,
3 years,
3 years.
under our model conditions.
You always correct me on that.
I got it.
E-H-L-E-N. E-H-L-E-N.
So, Mike, like one concern, like it takes 5 to 6 years for the trees to
Right.
grow, right? Like 2 things, right? Like one is the street lighting. I guess you'll add some street lighting in the path.
The
and
street
then
lighting, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Street lighting?
Street lighting and the view from top floor of the apartment.
Right. Well, the
Will the
street
trees come-
lighting is relatively low. We kept the height of the light fixtures low. And it's well distributed. We're using LED lights with 100% cutoff. So there's no spillage onto the adjoining properties. And you won't see the light source.
Okay. It doesn't reflect or?
No.
Okay. So so in your opinion, you think it's good enough for, like, in 5 years it will cover, you think? roughly,
Yes,
or?
I believe it will, yes.
Okay.
We've been very successful with the Green Giant Arborvitae, providing a dense evergreen screen between properties.
Okay, yeah, that's.
My experiences with that tree is that if it's properly watered and planted, it grows at about 2 feet a year, once it's established.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
Will there be a 2-year guarantee?
3.
3.
Look at the rules, the model conditions of approval. I don't know why.
Thanks.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Lonsfeld.
Just from timing, how many other?
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman, at this time.
Okay.
So, essentially complete.
At the last session, I'd asked for a clarification on the affordables being only 1 bedroom.
Yes.
I think I know what your answer should be, but I would like to have it on the record.
Sure, certainly, Mr. Klein. With respect to bedroom distribution, the Uniform Housing Affordability Controls, which are the state regulations governing affordable housing, including various things such as marketing, income requirements, and bedroom distribution, has a carve-out for age-restricted affordable units. And age-restricted affordable units can be 1-bedroom units. Can also be a combination of 2-bedroom or studios, but typically they're 1-bedroom units only. So they're not subject to the typical bedroom distribution requirements of family units, where you have to have a certain amount of 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom. Senior age-restricted affordable housing units under UHAC can be all 1-bedroom units. And this proposed project is in compliance with the UHAC regulations.
Thank you for clarifying the point for the record.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, with that, is there any member of the public that wishes to make a statement under oath about anything that has been testified to? We're good? Okay, thank you. Any closing statement?
Just very briefly, believe that the applicant and its expert witnesses has presented a very well-designed, very well-engineered development here. Most importantly, it's going to be providing much-needed affordable housing for Livingston Township. It's also essentially conforming with the exception of potentially 2 relatively minor bulk variances. The applicants also addressed the concerns of the board, its professionals, and the comments from the public have been generally supportive of the application, and I respectfully request that the board approve it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, this is Rishikesh Pipadipalli from 18 Forest Hill Road.
18 Forest Hill?
Yeah.
Need spelling?
Yeah, HRISHIKESH, last name. Shall I give my ID card? Yeah, HRISHIKESH, last name PIPPA, P as in Peter, PIPPADIPALLY. Yeah, just a general comment. Like I think, like again, like last time I mentioned, great deal, especially not having the main access, secondary access from the Forest Hill Road. Just request to minimize or eliminate the use of Forest Hill Road even for the construction, because the road is narrow and I think it's not in a good shape. So that's the only general comment that I have.
So I think you heard the concern about using it for construction vehicles during the process. I assume that that'll be considered as
There have been a number of applications where we have, as a condition of approval, required that the routing of construction vehicles be approved by the engineering department, and I think you could probably work that out.
Yeah, subject to the township engineer allowing us to use Forest Hill Road for certain situations.
Right. Right, so
that would be acceptable?
It's acceptable that the engineer would approve, and there may be circumstances where Forest Hill Road access may be needed for under certain circumstances, but in general, we try to avoid that.
Okay.
But it'll be ultimately subject to review of the engineer.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Just for the record, could you just go over the variances as far as the specifics of each one? There's only one listed on the application. So I want to make sure we get it right.
Right, there was just the one variance initially requested as part of the notice. There was a catch-all provision in the notice providing for any other necessary variances that may be required. The one variance is for the retaining wall. There was a question as to whether that really applied to retaining walls as opposed to decorative fences, but the retaining wall in the section of the site near the Forest Hill Road emergency access point. There was also a variance for the canopy signage. There's testimony that would be limited to dimensions of 2 feet by 9 feet. And Mr. Lanzafama did provide planning proofs in support of these 2 variances, and he is a licensed professional planner as well as a licensed professional engineer. And Mr. Appel also provided some testimony in support of the canopy signage.
You good, Richard?
Well, did Mr. Lonzafama give us the specifics on the retaining wall?
I believe he did. Yeah, I mean,
Maybe you should just go over it to make sure we have it. Yeah.
do you want testimony from Mr. Lanzafama, like a recap?
Well, if you
or-
say testify, you could just summarize it so we have it.
Well, I got the transcript from last hearing. I can.
No, I didn't like the transcript. From the last hearing, what we had brought up was the fact, to be on the safe side, we had noticed for a retaining wall variance, the height of the retaining wall exceeding 18 inches in the front yard. As I had testified about that, which I felt was a C2 variance in this particular circumstance, because the aesthetics of providing this terraced effect would help screen the buildings from the roadway, from the adjoining properties. And in addition to that, some of the retaining walls are actually below grade and are not even visible from the street, and provide for added stormwater management capabilities. So in my opinion, it would have fell under the C2 criteria. However, some of the board members, I believe, had indicated that they felt that that ordinance was more associated with landscape walls and not retaining walls. So I believe the determination was that a variance was not required.
Well, in the event the board votes it is, what is the height and what is the amount of the variance? That's what I don't
The
have.
height of the wall is 10 feet at the maximum, and what's allowed is only 18 inches, so it's 8.5-foot variance would be required.
But a portion of that was underground, is that correct? Or is that all above ground?
That one section of wall is all above ground. The
Thank you.
walls that are below grade are only about 5 feet high.
All right. That's what I needed.
So that's it?
Okay.
Okay.
And just a clarification on the canopy signage. You know, it occurs to us that the fire department may want slightly different signage. Would the board agree to a condition whereby the total square footage would be 18 square feet, and the height would not exceed 2 feet, but there may be a circumstance where the height would be a little lower and the length a little longer? If the board would accept that change to the requested relief, the applicant would be appreciative. Thank you.
Your concern is the fire department identification of the building, is that correct?
Correct. They may want slightly lower sign, I mean, a slightly lower height on the signage and longer signs.
Okay, got it.
Thank you.
So the parties having had the opportunity to make closing statements, it appears that the applicant, all interested persons, and board members have had the reasonable opportunity to be heard, that the evidentiary record of this hearing ought to be closed. Absent objection, the evidentiary record is closed, and no further testimony or evidence shall be heard or received. Board members should now have the opportunity to state or discuss their views on the application prior to a decision. Anybody have any additional thoughts other than what was offered during the course of both hearings?
Not any thoughts other than, I think, for the limited variances, I personally am one of the board members that don't think that the code section applies on the wall because it's in a section entitled decorative walls and fences, and these are clearly not decorative walls. Nonetheless, if we want to err on the side of the caution, I think that the criteria has been established basically for all the variances. Would also like to particularly recognize the developer, the applicant, for their efforts and outreach to the public. And we saw it here tonight where they had actually contacted and reached out to the neighbors to address their concerns, and I think that's always a good sign, and would just like to personally thank them for that. But other than that, I support the application.
Barry always steals what I want to say. As you know, the newest councilwoman, I always like to think about all of the residents and the impact sitting on the planning board that any building structure will have on the surrounding neighborhoods. But I commend you for going out and speaking to the residents and getting their input and opinion, because I think that that's what's going to drive this project and move it along and make it successful. The fact that they are not here tonight and that there's buy-in and that you took the time to actually meet with them means a lot to the board, so thank you. Much appreciated.
And just for members of the public that may be watching at home or at a later date, this is part of the town's affordable housing settlement obligation, and we thank you for working with the town as we get through these issues.
I appreciate the project. I think it's a plus to the town, assuming we need the building. I also like I thought the presentation was extremely well done, and the consideration for the neighbors was very important to me, and I think that's a plus.
So I think based upon the comments of the board, I think we've given guidance to our attorney for the preparation of a resolution, considering that this hearing was over, 2 nights. We want to make sure that we have it right. So absent objection, I think we've given our attorney non-binding guidance to prepare a resolution for us to consider. When? When do you think you might? The May meeting, the second May meeting, would that work?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that would work. And just to clarify, could the board just comment briefly on the variance relief that's being granted?
Sure.
Just a little unclear.
The variance for the wall is a precautionary variance because, as Mr. Lewis said, it probably is not the sort of thing that is limited by the 18-inch height, and it is covered by the ordinary statutory standards for retaining walls. But just to avoid any conflict potentially down the road, the applicant has asked for the variance, and I think, again, we should be granting it on that basis.
Yeah, agreed. Is there any objection?
No.
And any objection to the canopy sign? Hearing none.
And just to clarify, on the canopy signage, it's the 18 square feet maximum and the not to exceed 2 feet in height.
Correct.
It could be lower than 2 feet.
Unless,
longer.
but you mentioned unless, of course, that the fire department may require some, minor variation of that.
Correct.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? So I think with that, we are, if I can have a motion to
Did you
adjourn?
announce the date, the May date?
It was the second, what is that date?
That date, Mr. Chairman, is May 16th
The 16th?
at
further notice.
7:30 p.m.
Okay, no further notice is required.
Correct.
If I can have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Thanks.
He's acting in the place of Mr.
Thank you.
Steiner.
Thank you.